Plans are in the works to reopen the economy, and the mayor made it clear when the time is right. That said, our normal will be a new normal that requires some adjustment. And the possibility exists if the novel coronavirus flares again, we may be forced to stay safe at home again. In fact, health officials say it may flare not just a second, but maybe even a third time. It's something we have to be prepared for, physically and emotionally. Dr. Tracy Alloway, a psychologist with UNF, joins us once again here on the morning show. So this sheltering in place now has led to depression in a lot of people, and even the thought of another round may compound that stress. So knowing what the future may hold, what we do, I hate to say this, I'm kind of a pessimist. How do we cope with a future that we can't control?
That's a great question, Bruce. The first thing that we need to do is refocus into an optimistic outlook. And the way to do that is to list one thing that you're grateful for each day. In my published research, I looked at over 3,000 people, and I found that an optimistic outlook made a huge difference in protecting us against a depressive symptomology. So it's really important to take that perspective and think, as you wake up each day, what am I grateful for? And again, an optimistic outlook is very different from just happiness. Optimism is having a positive outlook about the future.
Sounds good in practice. So why does it work?
It works because it can actually rewire our brain, switching us from a kind of pessimistic outlook. And studies show from brain imaging that it actually activates our left side of the brain, more associated with language, which is also associated with the more optimistic outlook. So just that simple action of expressing something that you're optimistic about or grateful about in the morning can reshift and rewire how your brain is actually working.
So I'm a journalist. I know that words matter. A lot of people use the word in the sentence, but when they talk about a situation, how about changing that word to yes? And does that make a psychological difference?
That's another great example that researchers show that just that simple word change can also signal to the brain that we need to adopt a different perspective. So instead of saying yes, but, say yes and. And again, that word change from but to and signals to your brain that we need to adopt this more optimistic outlook about our future.
So that signals a difference to us mentally.
Absolutely.
Now, I mentioned pessimism. Would defensive be a better approach rather than pessimistic?
Yes, and this is something that kind of takes a lot of people by surprise, Bruce, because here psychologists talk about the idea of defensive pessimism. Now, we can also swing to the other side of optimism where we're wearing our rose-tinted glasses and we think, oh, everything's going to be fine, we don't need to worry, and that can also be very counterproductive. We do not want to swing to the other side where everything is going to be perfect and sunshine and so on. So this idea of defensive pessimism, defensive pessimism brings us back to the center and says it's a proactive way of dealing with something. And in fact, studies show that entrepreneurs and people who start new businesses, when they have a defensive, pessimistic outlook, they tend to be more proactive in planning for what might go wrong. So as we're shifting to a new normal or a new way in which we engage, we need to also think about what could go wrong and how can we prepare for that. So taking a more proactive approach.
You know, we all want control. We don't have any control right now. What's the best thing that we can do to cope with that uncertainty?
And that is such a great point. A lack of autonomy, in my research, I found was a big predictor of depression. And this idea, lack of autonomy, is obviously linked in with a lack of control. So one way to do that is to think, what is one thing in my life that I control? Maybe that's my attitude. Maybe that is having that optimistic attitude. Maybe that's changing my language to reframe it to something positive. So again, instead of thinking, oh, well, I can't control when I'm going back to work, or I can't control the fact that my kids are still going to finish out the school year at home rather than in a classroom. What can you control? So again, it's about shifting that focus and reframing to what you can do.
And I have my kids home. I can talk to my kids. I can enjoy some time with my kids, which I couldn't before. That makes a big difference.
Yes.
Doc, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Some good advice.
Thank you so much.
Jen.